Why F-35B demo specifically? We want to showcase what the capabilities the aircraft has and show the American public kind of what the Marine Corps brings to the fight. I think that's really important, showing our enemies what we're capable of.
We have a conventional takeoff, a short takeoff, a trundle stow, a button stow, a stick stow. We have a conventional landing, slow landing, rolling vertical landing, creeping vertical landing, vertical landing. That is definitely one of the biggest challenges of the F-35 is keeping your admin tight.
Between community relations, doing all that kind of stuff, that really, it's cool to see eyes light up for new generation coming along.
Now, I don't know about you, but my favorite time of year is not summer with its endless activities or even the quaint year-end holidays, but rather airshow season. And here on the Fighter Pilot Podcast, we've had several episodes featuring the U.S. Air Force's F-16 Viper and F-22 Raptor demo teams. We've even had a pilot on talking about flying the C-17 Globemaster III as part of an airshow routine. Well, you are in luck because today we get to learn all about the Marine Corps' F-35B Lightning II demo team, courtesy of the outgoing and incoming pilots who join me today here at the Circle Air Group studios at Gillespie Field, just down the road from Marine Corps Air Station Miramar, where you guys are based. Brembo, Chuckles, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Joe.
Yeah, it's great. And Brembo, big kudos to you, man. You've been working on me for a while. I was kind of playing hard to get there for a while.
Yeah, but, persistence is key.
Yeah, it is.
Good,
it is.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, though.
Good. Glad to have you. And part of it, if I may defend myself, was hoping we could get this a little closer to actual air show season, which I think kicks off for you guys, Yuma?
Yuma will be a first show, yeah. Right. Chuckles will be flying that this season.
Mid-March.
Mid-March.
Yeah.
All right. Fantastic. All right. Well, hey, I want to learn all about the demo team. We've had other, like I said, F-16, F-22 guys talk about the demo, the team, the logistics, and all that. But first, let's get to know you guys now. We'll start with you, Brembo. Where are you from? Where did you go to school? And what have you done so far in the Marine Corps?
Yeah, so Major Craig Norris, call sign Brembo, originally from South Florida, Naples area. Parents both military brats growing up. So dad was a Navy pilot. Older brother's an infantry officer in the Marine Corps, season 0302, so I got a lot of flyboy infantry grunt back and forth there. Little brother's actually an F-18 Hornet pilot as well on Miramar, so we got kind of the same base, which is really neat, and we actually dogfought. I guess that would be the past tense during there.
I think so.
So we had a pretty cool opportunity to do that as well, so it's awesome being stationed at the same area as him. So again, grew up in South Florida, went to App State, North Carolina, was a walk-on football player. I think that kind of personality of the Marine Corps, kind of that linebacker, fullback type personality kind of attracted me to the Marines. Did OCS, so post-grad, OCC, so a 10-week commissioning course, went to TBS, and then the standard kind of flight school route. Was lucky enough to select jets and actually selected F-35 at a flight school. So showed up to Beaufort, South Carolina, and at the time, as a brand new F-35 pilot back in 2018, Major Frank Zast to Bill Callsign Chomps, who went on to be a Blue Angel, was doing the demonstration routine for F-35B. So kind of got, as a brand new student, got a chance to see him and kind of what that routine was all like, so it kind of shaped wanting to do that in the future, so it was really cool and impactful. Left Beaufort, went to VMFA 211, the Wake Island Avengers over in Yuma, Arizona. Had some phenomenal commanding officers in my time there, and was lucky enough to deploy on the maiden voyage of the Queen Elizabeth. Did that for, including work up about a year, actually deployed with Chuckles on that boat. So a lot of good anecdotes and stories associated with that. Some for camera and for off camera as well, over beer. But yeah, so deployed there. Got orders as an instructor pilot to VMFAT 502 at Mag 11 over in Miramar. Living in San Diego now and been instructing there for about 2.5 years. Part of that is instructor, as an FRS instructor, or RAG as it was previously discussed. And was lucky enough to execute the demonstration routine as the demonstration pilot for the 2024 season, which was really special. So that's in a nutshell my background.
Terrific. So, Dad, 3 sons, 3 Marines, happy or sad or?
Yeah, he's a Marine personality. I would say he was a power lifter, all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, he was happy. The pilot route was all good. So, yeah, he's pumped. So,
all right, very good. Chuckles, how about you?
Yeah, originally from Oakland, California, born and raised in the San Francisco Bay Area. Big aviation background in my family, so flew GA with my dad. I think the first picture of me holding the yoke of a Cessna, I'm about 6 months old, flying with my dad. So grew up doing that. My grandfather was a Army Air Corps, and then subsequently Air Force pilot in World War II timeframe, flew the P-38 and P-51. Then my brother's actually a Marine Corps pilot, was a Marine Corps pilot as well. He flew the CH-53 Echo Super Stallion, retired in 2015. In college, really, if it had a wing, I'd like to fly it. So I did paragliding, hang gliding, was a skydiving coach for a couple of years in there. So had a love of aviation my whole life. In terms of the Marine Corps, went on active duty in 2012, had a pretty standard pathway through naval flight training. Selected Harriers first in October 2015, did a tour out in Yuma, did a combat deployment on the USS America, LHA-6. 2019 transitioned to the F-35 and then went back out to Yuma, joined VMFA 211 with Brembo, did the Queen Elizabeth deployment, and then have been out here in San Diego teaching students at the FRS for a little over a year and have a little over 2 years left.
Okay. So that's why you're the incoming demonstration pilot. And you've been doing it a little while, so you're the outgoing, so we get both perspectives here. That'll be cool.
Absolutely.
All right. Now, so we had Brian Simmons on the show, call sign SAC. Was that the same deployment he was on? Have we done more than one?
Yeah, so now Lieutenant Colonel Kimmons. SAC is, so he was on the deployment as well. He was our executive officer, so
okay.
We have a really close relationship with him. We're actually both LSOs, so he trained us actually on the Queen Elizabeth. So many a night spent in a dark tower watching awesome F-35s come in to vertically land on the Queen, so it was cool. Good experience.
It's been a few episodes since then, and he was on a crusade of sorts to get everything going. Any update on how that's going? Is he?
I think it's Chuckles speak this probably a little more, but I think it's going along swimmingly. I might know.
That's actually a bad pun.
Yeah, that is a bad pun. Yeah, sorry. It's going flyingly, I guess would be the better term. But no, he's doing an incredible job there, kind of building it up from the ground floor, and it just shows from a Marine Corps standpoint, kind of what we're able to do on an individual level to kind of build those schools up. Pretty incredible. So.
Yeah. As is the case with a lot of my past guests, we end up connected on social media, and I think I saw an update. He was headed off overseas somewhere, so I think maybe Japan, because he had talked about doing something with that.
Yeah, pretty neat. The Izumo class destroyers were Marine Corps landing aircraft on there. So, and we anecdotally talked to Queen Elizabeth about operations there of just kind of leap padding from ship to ship, which is pretty incredible. So that's part of the reason the flexibility of F-35B is incredible from that standpoint. So yeah, he's probably in Japan, obviously Italy, all these different places. So yeah, rough travel life. I'm sure he's enjoying some of the travel though.
Well, Lieutenant Colonel too. That's terrific.
Yeah.
Well, but speaking of SAC, he and I spoke a lot about landing on the boat and how to do that, because for me that was different than I'm used to. But let's get back to a little bit of the F-35B itself, because I don't know that we've talked too much about it. We've had episodes on the F-35 class, if you will, of aircraft. But Chuckles, maybe you can start with this, because you said you started flying the Harrier.
Yeah,
How many hours did you end up with in that?
All said and done, about 450 hours in the Harrier.
And how many now in the F-35B?
A little over 600.
Okay. So give us a background or primer, whatever you want to call it, on either jump jets or the requirement for the F-35B. As I understand, it actually sort of set the stage for the other two as far as what they would look like and the lifting fan and all that other stuff. But I don't know. What can you tell us about the F-35B?
Yeah, so F-35B, the Marine Corps has wanted sort of that expeditionary capability, land on very short runways, take off from very short runways, land and recover to a ship without a resting cable or a launch bar. So we kind of, just like you said, pulled that requirement and that capability out of the Harrier. And I would say the biggest difference is the 20 to 30 year generational gap in technology. So F-35, incredibly complex aircraft, but through that complexity, they've greatly reduced pilot workload and is a much easier aircraft to fly. So in the Harrier, no flight control system, direct linkage with hydraulic assist to the flight controls themselves. You could get yourself in a pretty bad place pretty quickly flying the Harrier. F-35, a lot of double redundant, if not triple redundant systems to include the flight control system. Does a really good job to make landing and recovering as easy as it can be for the pilots flying.
Yeah. And I understand the way you hover is different in each one, right? So Aviate-B, I don't even know what you do, but in a F-35B, the inceptors work the same. So if you push forward, you're going to go down, versus if you push forward on the throttle, you're going to go, what?
Forward
or faster.
Yeah.
And that's theoretically the same in either mode of flight, I guess.
Yeah, that's how the F-35 was designed. So the stick will always control your flight path, essentially, and the throttle will always control your rate of movement forward or backwards. Harrier, just like you said, kind of once established in the hover mode, flew a little bit more like a helicopter. So your throttle with your nozzles pointed down, if you cut the power, you would descend. Whereas through the magic of the flight control system, which, to be honest, I don't fully understand, the F-35 is significantly easier to fly.
Yeah. Well, as long as you can employ it, I'll give you a pass for that one.
Yeah.
Okay, so the transition from hovering in the Harrier to hovering in the Lightning II, was that difficult, or just flip a switch and off you go? People ask me the same thing. I'll give you a chance to think. When I went from the F-18 to the F-16, it was the same stick, but it was just not the exact same, but it was off to the side. People say, "Oh, how hard was that?" Like, not at all. Once you just get your head around it, you have to remember where to reach. But I don't know. Was it much of a transition?
Overall, I'd say pretty easy. You got to learn the new HOTAS in the new aircraft, so the buttons are in different places and they do different things. But overall, a fairly easy transition. You kind of get inside of your own OODA loop a couple times in your first few sims, but it's fairly fast transition.
All right. And Brembo, you've only flown now the F-35 after flight training. How many hours in it?
About 1,000, coming up on 1,000 now. Cool. Yeah, so about 8 years. 2018 was when we started. So it's been interesting. The jet itself to be kind of on the infancy stage of it as a new guy too, because you can tell, as you know, with the F-18, the F-16, right, the NATOPS and TMS MDS specific was kind of set in stone, 20 years into the inception of the aircraft. With us early on in 2018 even, there's a lot of stuff changing, a lot of data points that you even as a student are discovering and helping to kind of create updates. We'll joke about the pocket checklist here, but the B model admittedly is a thicker beast than the A and the C model for the F-35, and that just deals with all of the short takeoff vertical landing stuff that can inevitably go wrong. The jet is a pure pleasure to fly, absolutely, and the flight control systems are incredible. That makes flying the demonstration routine that much more enjoyable. But yeah, if you look just for reference here, you got PCL. About half of that is what happens when you take a drive shaft and try to plug it into a vertical non-combustible lift fan and have roll posts coming out your arms as a transformer and as a general aviation enthusiast growing up as well. When you get into what's called jetboard in this aircraft, it's not pull back on the stick. The houses get smaller, push forward, the houses get bigger. There's a whole nother control, all that stuff that's going on in that jet. So we'll talk about it in a second. But what makes that demo for me so special is the ability to kind of show the capabilities, the expeditionary nature of the jet. Because I'm doing for layman's terms, 700 plus mile an hour pass. And within a couple minutes, I'm in a dead hover staring at the crowd in the eye, which is pretty wild. So it's really, it's fascinating. But yeah, it's interesting. For reference here, that is a Dragon, as they call it, an AV8 PCL pocket checklist underneath, and that's kind of the regular size of a Legacy.
That's what I remember.
Yeah, Legacy or an A and C model is what that
Dragon,
PCL.
It says AV8B.
Yeah, that's the Dragon drivers, as the old Harrier guys. Okay. So just complexities of that, and that speaks to, and we'll talk about it a little bit, but our primary mission outside of running the demonstration on the West Coast here is teaching new students. So pretty robust, single seat. I mean, you had Raz on as well talking about single seat, F-22 single seat, F-35 single seat. There's no T-bird, there's no two-seater. So the students that get put through the ringer on this is to make sure that they are able, and when they strap into the jet for the first time, that they're able to handle all those emergencies because they come fast and quick, especially in this aircraft. But again, incredible service history of the aircraft. It's just you have to know if anything can go wrong, you got to know how to fix it. But incredible, service history of the aircraft. Yeah,
this other one is more the size I'm used to, so I can only imagine the complexity. But I also understand that with the displays, maybe there's only so much you can do, and there's not that many circuit breakers and everything else. So it's
I always joke when we give the sanctioned tours and stuff out by the flight line. It's pretty interesting because people look in and they expect to see all the circuit breakers and the switches and all that kind of stuff. I mean, it goes back to aviation in the '60s where you had even in commercial aviation where you had the big wall of switches and all that kind of stuff. But there's a handful of switches in the jet. Everything else is a touchscreen. I always joke with this jet, it's like flying a giant iPhone. And from that standpoint is we even get software updates. So our iOSs and stuff, updates and stuff. It's like, hey, the F-35 is going to give an update tonight at midnight as long as you can send, blah, blah, blah. So it has that's anecdotally, hyperbole, but it has very similar feel to that. You wake up the next day and maybe they've tweaked something, they've improved something, a button, HOTAS, hands on throttle and stick starts doing something different, which is pretty incredible. And then you look in the cockpit itself, and I'm not saying anything that people don't already know, but we have two giant panoramic cockpit displays. So unlike kind of MFD, DDI, and previous platforms where they were pretty rigid and where the SMS page is and where all this kind of stuff, we have fully customizable. So as an iPad generation baby, I think it fits better for all of us on that. So and we talk about kind of the displays we utilize in demo as well later.
Well, I have to think one of the big displays is what you wear on your head, and you've got one on the rack there behind you guys, but that's got to be part of all that because no matter where you're looking, you're getting information there too, right? Yeah,
and he could speak to the distributed aperture system, but that's one of the primary means we use coming into the hover as well, if Chuckles wants to touch on that.
Yeah, the helmet's great. So flying the Harrier with the HUD, you could see your targets if they were designated within about 10 degrees of forward. Whereas now you can designate surface track, air-to-air track on your HMD, and then you can actually look out, see where that is, and time and space in relation to your aircraft, and get your nose pointed where it needs to significantly easier. Just like Brembo talked about, a lot of people ask, like, hey, is it true you can see through the floor in the F-35? And it absolutely is. We have 360-degree cameras, and we can pipe that video directly into our helmet. And that's a great capability as well.
One of the things to add on that, so you can take that distributed aperture system, mainly used for missile warning, essentially. So it'll superimpose kind of a green diamond over an incoming missile, whether that be surface to air or air-to-air, which is incredible. So it's an awesome feature we'll use in accordance with our EW system. But we can also utilize that. Again, those 6 cameras sync up and essentially a secondary night vision for us. But we can isolate one of those cameras on our display. Zach talked about this a little bit, but I always joke for the demo is when you see me coming into hover and all my doors are opening up and I'm slowing down. I kind of call it the F-35 backup cam, just like when you hit reverse on your car and you got the backup cam there and it shows the lines and all that kind of stuff. So we have almost a backup cam, but for Stovall underneath us as I come in, so I can go ahead and see as I'm coming over the pad where I'm at, make all those minor corrections. At the boat, interestingly enough, over the boat, there's some downwash of the water, so it's less reliable. But our primary means of the boat is via different boat-based systems that we're going to get over with. But yeah, it's pretty awesome. So you can take that little individual plane that you're visibly seeing on your display and kind of put that where you want it. So it's pretty neat as you come to hover, you're staring at San Francisco Bay, and you got the ability to kind of see everything there.
Yeah. Sounds like it. Well, and we could probably go on forever on the F-35B. Let's move into the demo, though. And again, we've had other folks on and talk about why and how and all that. But let's start with the why. And maybe we can even draw a comparison to RAS as far as the way the Air Force does it. But why have an F-35B demo team?
Yeah, on the demo itself, primarily the Marine Corps overall mission from that standpoint is to ultimately support that Marine rifleman on the ground, right? That's our end state. But what I think is interesting, that's either directly or indirectly, and that's in today's fight and it's in tomorrow's fight as well. And the advancement of technology, everyone can see that coming. So from a standpoint of F-35B and what it provides to us from an expeditionary nature and supporting the Marine Air Ground Task Force and what we're looking to do in future capabilities as well, it's an incredible platform, and it puts the E in expeditionary from that standpoint. I mean, we can take off with 400 to 500 feet on a ship, or hundreds of feet with a full combat load on shore and land essentially in a postage stamp. And we can leap pad from ship to ship with various different partner nations. This jet, from a precision guided munitions standpoint, it puts the F in fighter. This thing can fight incredibly well as well. And when you look at kind of the indirect mission supporting Marines on the ground, that could be anywhere from anti-air warfare, so your DCA, OCA, AI, strikes. We specialize specifically for the F-35 and F-35B and SEAD, suppression of air defenses. So layman's terms, surface-to-air missile system, site, we want to go. We're going to geolocate that site in enemy territory. We're going to neck that down to be able to utilize our various sensors to essentially, in state, put a precision-guided munition on that target. So indirect, and then direct is good old-fashioned close air support, all that stuff that Marines look for us to provide for them. So the big thing for us, why F-35B demo specifically, is just we want to showcase what the capabilities the aircraft has and show the American public kind of what the Marine Corps brings to the fight. I think that's really important. I think the second thing is ultimately deterrence. Raz talked about that a little bit, but showing our enemies what we're capable of as that kind of linebacker mentality, as we talked about. Mm-hmm. And then for me as a demo pilot, the third thing I would say is just that community outreach from that standpoint. Chuckles and I will attest to it, as many of you guys are as well, as just going to air shows as kids and experience that with our dad. So between community relations, doing all that kind of stuff, that really it's cool to see eyes light up for new generation coming along to hopefully be future Marine dogfighters from that standpoint. So I'll let Chuckles talk to you kind of his reasoning. But long story long, Jello. That's why F-35B demo from that perspective. So.
Well, and if you want to add to that, Chuckles, go ahead. Or also tell us how it's different. Again, not to say better or worse than Raz and when he was in here with the F-22 folks, but as I understand, the organization's a little different. You both already said you're FRS instructors primarily. Yeah,
so at its core, the Marine Corps doesn't really have a demonstration team, right? Marines train to fight. However, just like Brembo talked about, there is a lot of maneuvering space to engage with the public and win the hearts and minds of that next generation, right? So I grew up going to air shows too, and seeing demos is part of the reason I'm here today. So that's important, right? Some of the biggest differences, I guess, between the ACC teams and the Blue Angels, just like you hit it on the head, our primary duty is training the next generation of students. So 320 days out of the year, we're FRS instructor pilots, teaching the next pilots. We do about 5 shows a year, so significantly reduced number from what you kind of see from the ACC shows. And then obviously the Blue Angels. And I'd say the biggest thing that sets us apart, right, is getting the word out that the Marines actually fly jets.
Does that still need to be gotten out?
I have family members who, after I'd been in the Marines for a couple of years, asked me if I was in the Air Force. But we were out in San Antonio last year, Central Texas, kind of limited Marine presence, and you had people walking up to us after Brembo's demo, and they were like, "Oh my gosh, that was the coolest thing I've ever seen." Yeah. Aircraft was going 700 miles an hour and then dead hover. So it's important to get that message out there and then reach out to the public.
Yeah. And to that point, Jello, too, we do 5 to 6 shows on the West Coast. Our sister squadron, VMFAT 501, the Warlords, we actually trained initially, and then they split into 501 and 502. So we train new F-35B pilots at 501 and 502 for the RAG or FRS. Mm-hmm. So they handle the East Coast teams essentially. And East Coast shows. So we kind of split it down the middle from that standpoint. Primary mission is making students. The secondary mission is obviously what we talked about. So we got some awesome demonstration pilots out on the East Coast as well that are executing those shows. So it's cool to kind of bounce ideas off each other and make the best product possible from an F-35B perspective.
Well, and it makes sense from the outside looking in, right? Having watched that documentary on the Blue Angels a couple years ago now, that is like a commitment. I mean, everything they're doing, and yes, they're doing theoretically things we do in the fleet, but they're doing it at such a tighter level and it's so scripted, not to take anything away from them. Everything you're doing, I assume, not to put words in your mouth in this demo, is things you're doing in the F-35B. So all you're doing is, hey, what do we need to do to be legitimate for an air show and showcase these things that we're doing, which is not that much different. I'm not flying inches from another aircraft. So for you to be able to divide your chores between teaching and flying the demo, to me, from the outside, doesn't seem maybe that big of a conflict?
Yeah, it's actually a great place to have the demo nested in the FRS. We have a large emphasis on precision basic maneuvers teaching students, and a huge emphasis on flight series data and NATOPS knowledge, right, which is required for troubleshooting emergencies and very important when you're in these sort of high-stress demo scenarios. So we're also non-deployable, so we kind of provide the continuity to execute the demo throughout the entire season. So the Fleet Replacement Squadron is a great place for the demo to live.
It is fascinating, though, to Chuckles' point, right? So we're Fleet Replacement Squadron instructor pilots. So when we come in, we're going to see a brand new student from the T-45, and it is fascinating as a T-45 Goshawk, the mighty T-45 Goshawk, I might add, going to an F-35, just the colossal jump in technology, speed, power that goes from that aircraft. So we take these students as they show up to the door. They have zero knowledge on the F-35. They've flown just over about 100 hours in the T-45 Goshawk jet trainer. And they come to us, and again, we got to get them ready to go for their first flight. But we start a student out, and that student's first flight is just going out and learning how the buttons work, how to fly the jet. And then, you push 8 months later, and that student is doing an opposed essay, insert surface to air missile system takedown with adversary air and all these complex systems and stuff. So it's really cool to see the infancy of a student, all hard-charging men and women that are coming to us to learn and seeing kind of the progression of that. But to your point, the routine is like fascinatingly close to what we're doing on any given day. So for an example, going out and doing a, let's say a BFM perch set where you're executing maybe a 9K set. At the end of that set, you end up in, on the deck and maybe a kind of a flat scissors type maneuverability where those horizontal stabs are dug in, they're working, you're a slow airspeed, all that kind of stuff. That's exactly like our slow speed pass, right? So what's really nice and having experience in the jet from a demonstration perspective, having deployed in the jet as well, is the advanced handling characteristics as a demo pilot. Those you have down, so you're able to really showcase that. And again, to your point, it is 100% of what we do every day from that standpoint. It's just done close to the crowd, with air show like environment, vice. Yeah.
And there's certain rules for, of course, the boundaries and all that.
For sure.
As Raz talked about. So there's things you have to know, but you just add it to your repertoire. Well, how do you get picked, Chuckles? How do you become Brembo's replacement?
Yeah, so I was on the team last season as the ground safety observer. So we'll generally have, ideally, a couple demo pilots who are qualified at any given time and a couple ground safety observers. As we kind of start wrapping up the season, kind of end of summer, you'll have your squadron mates kind of nominate who they think may be a good candidate based on, maturity, NATOPS knowledge, aptitude, things like that. Ultimately, it's the decision of the commanding officer.
Sure.
And then once selected by the commanding officer, we go right into our workup phase.
Okay.
Workup phase for that too, Joe, is roughly about 10 to 12 flights, depending on if extra flights need to be seen, and then our pretty robust 10 to 12 simulator events as well. And then we are qualified, designated by the FAA. So everything you see up there, I think it's fascinating too. None of it's cowboy, right? All of it is under the maneuvers that we execute in the package, in the sim over and over again from that standpoint. What was really cool with Chuckles this season specifically, I consider one of my best friends in and out of the squadron, but having deployed with Chuckles, having known Chuckles as long as I had, and him having been essentially the ground safety observer, the radio operator for me as we traveled, we had really kind of a synchronicity that you're not going to see really anywhere else. So we were able to pick up that really fast, and it made a lot more enjoyable air shows, and I think it made for better performance ultimately having him there. We made the joke that our first and middle names are both Craig Michael as well, so that may or may not be a demonstration pilot requirement in the future, but we may have a smaller pool to pick from as well.
Possibly a traveling comedy duo.
Yes, yeah. We'll see. This is after,
so it's like dinner and a show.
Yeah, exactly. Depending on what event you go to afterwards, that's how it works.
All right. What about the ground folks that support you if you go somewhere away from home base? Is that just whoever's available or volunteers?
Yeah, so we try to keep it as much of a team construct.
Okay.
Again, we have some motivated men and women, enlisted maintainers. And they are working day in and day out to produce fleet replacement squadron pilots to the fleet operating forces to finish those pilots from their syllabus. Mm-hmm. But we try to keep it as much of a team as possible. We have about 18 that travel with us from a maintainer perspective. When you look at that, the stuff that they are able to do, I always equate it to being on the in a hotel on the road with your travel kit. You don't have all the items that you want. You're like, oh man, I forgot this, I forgot that. I got to go to the CVS down the street and my bathrobe to get my toiletry stuff. So they do a great job of it's 100% legality. Safety is always paramount. But when you're away from home and you're having to work twice as hard based on not having the comfort of your own home, they do an incredible job for us. We always strive to kind of impart on them that even though there's 200,000 people possibly waiting in a 15-minute gap to go get an air show done, nothing goes out of the realms of safety when we're executing that. So nothing but the utmost professionals, and it's nice for them and us to kind of get out, see a different part of the world and interact with people as well. They do a phenomenal job on that. So.
Yeah.
Great thing to add too is part of that team is other 3rd Marine Aircraft Wing assets that get us to these locations. So usually when we're traveling, it's a Marine C-130, Marine Osprey, Marine CH-53 that's getting our Marines and tools to these locations. So it is truly a team effort from 3rd MA and really operating under kind of how the Marines do business normally, right? Which is as a combined team. So it's great.
Well, and you're probably not going around the world. You're even dividing the
United there States. Have been there have been times like Friendship Day in Japan kind of produce or provided MAG-12 jets essentially, but typically we're not traveling, not the same footprint that F-22 or F-35A is going to execute. It's typically again that West Coast and East Coast with 501 and 502 executing those shows up and down the coast. So.
Okay, cool. Well, so again, Chuckles, you're coming into this. What's the qualification requirement? Is there an hours requirement, or just the fact that you're at the FRS as an instructor, that your hat is in the ring, or maybe you have to throw it in the ring, but what's the requirement? Yeah,
so starting, I guess, probably 18 months ago, expressed my interest, and that's kind of step one, right? Okay. Got schooled up as the ground safety observer. I was at every air show last season, so there's an element of dedication that I think that demonstrates.
Sure.
We went through the nomination process that we just discussed, and then started the workup. Brembo talked through the syllabus, and there's a lot of moving pieces with that. El Centro, NAF El Centro, is very helpful. They note them out basically their entire airfield so we can go out there and practice, work through a fairly demanding syllabus, and then we completed that last November and was fully qualified there.
And like other teams, does your routine have different contingencies for weather? And
it sure does. That's one of the most difficult parts of it. We always joke with the complexity of the show itself, and then you still have to fly a perfectly FAA-regulated flight to and from the box. So in the fighter community, we use the term fangs in and fangs out. So you're fangs in, flying, whatever departure procedure out of the outlying field that you're in. Once you get into the box, there's just a rapid succession of things you have to check in with Air Boss, all this kind of stuff. Then you're fangs out under the umbrella of safety within the routine itself, and then you got to go right back into fangs in from a landing contingency. So I think there's some complexities of that. A lot of the show itself, we have 3 different shows. There's a level 3, level 2, and level 1. Level 3 is our high show, and it's all done within that aerobatic box, like Raz talked about. So you have the 500-foot show line, the 1,500-foot show line, line. All your aerobatic, highly aerobatic maneuvers are going to go in that 15 air foot show line. And then the level 2 is just going to be a truncated based on weather and ceiling. So, but again, that can be, you may fuel up that day for a level 3 show, which requires a different gas load, and then the weather quickly deteriorates. I give the example of San Francisco. You got the clouds moving over the bay, and I could almost see it. I took off from Oakland, and I'm sitting there in the jet, waiting for the time. We got 20 minutes, and you can almost see the clouds, like something from the Mummy movie coming in to the. And I'm getting, we're trying to get radio calls. We're too far away. We're taking off. So you take off. You do the best you can. You do kind of a pilot recce of the weather at that point. Air boss lets you in, but yeah, from a complexity standpoint, when you look at demonstration, though, again, I think there's a difference too between air shows that you see at the same airfield where it's you launch, you take off, you're in the box, everything's going. Whereas like to give it a Seattle or San Francisco, gorgeous air shows. One's over the bay, San Francisco Bay, one's over Lake Washington. But you're taking off from Boeing Field or Oakland or outlying fields, right? So it's contingent upon you to now you're having to change your fuel planning. We're trying to give the best show we can, but now fuel is going to be adjusted. You're doing all the check-ins. As soon as I get done with ATC out of Oakland, I'm switched up. I'm immediately giving a showtime call and safety checks complete to him and checking with Air Boss and getting on, and all this stuff is happening rapidly. So it can cause for some excitement there, certainly.
Yeah. And you said earlier, I'll ask it, but I know the answer. You don't just get into things, and I guess it was anyway in the routine. You're not just making up. Now I'll do a high speed pass. Now I'll do a slow speed pass. I guess I'll hover now. You have a routine.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
Right?
And specifically, that routine is vetted by the FAA, so it is certified before the season. That's a process we'll go through. So I had the esteemed luxury of driving out from San Diego to El Centro, California for 10 different practices to certify this guy. No, it was not bad at all. I was originally in Yuma, so we traveled from Yuma ultimately. So. But yeah, so went out to certify him. But yeah, we ultimately get FAA involved in that as well, and they certify the whole show. So, but there is, the F-35. Raz talked about this as well. He did a great job explaining this, right? This thing, I call it an iPhone, right? The fighter iPhone, if you will. Don't trademark that. From a standpoint of it is all pilot input at that point, right? So there is a lot of pressure to maintain the given routine, and we're always super hard on ourselves too. Specifically, the Blues do a lot of this. All the chair flying, Thunderbirds, chair flying, and really going through the flight as an individual, pre-brief. We're in a room walking through the routine, physically walking through the routine to make sure everything is doped out from that perspective. So yeah, there is so much that goes on behind the scenes before you see the actual product in front of you, which is
smart. Speaking of that, let's talk about the actual demo, if that's cool. And I've got my laptop here ready to go. And this was, as I understand it, well, of course, it's right there in the title, Yuma from last year. So this is you, right, Brembo?
Yeah, this is first air show. The funny thing about this, anecdotally, I always give about Yuma is, smaller air show, awesome air show, Arizona, but it's home of Mag 13, where we did our fleet tour. But, the high pressure of 200,000, 300,000 plus in some of these other locations, I would say Yuma arguably was the most stressful from a pilotage standpoint. Yuma is kind of the bastion of F-35B pilots. So you got 4 gun squadrons there. You've got VMX-1 operational tests. You got Marine Aviation Weapons Tactics Squadron 1, our weapons school. So I knew during this demo that I had probably 150 F-35B pilots eyes on me, as well as the other crowd. So
they're just waiting.
And my debrief, other air shows I came over, and the guests after I got out of the jet and went to the tent where we kind of do community relations. Everyone's like, I've never even seen a fighter jet fly before. And Yuma, when I got to the tent, it was like, hey man, when you came in, I was a little trundle. You kind of slowed down. Did you have an issue there? So I essentially felt like I was getting a graded pass at the boat after the Yuma Air Show, but a really special first one ultimately going in there.
Good. Well, this is from Airshow Stuff. It's a YouTube channel, and we're going to just give him the credit due here. But all right, so, and we're not going to listen to the audio on here because we can talk about that.
Yeah, Jello, what you're seeing here, doors opening up. If you could pause that real quick. We do a pretty cool, you'll see kind of a paint job from the individual squadron. So I actually used a Mag 13 jet there. So that's the Wake Island Avengers Roundel, which was pretty cool. So I got to use the jet that I used in the fleet.
You're talking about the inside
the lift fan,
door,
yeah. And this is what's pretty amazing about the F-35 here is we are now converting into STOVL, short takeoff vertical landing mode.
Okay.
We have 5 or 6 different types of takeoffs we can execute, 5 or 6 different types of landings we can execute. So this thing really is a Swiss Army knife from a standpoint, and that's what's cool about this. So when we're at the field in a training mode, teaching students all this kind of stuff, 95% of the time we're doing a max afterburner conventional takeoff. Flies like a jet.
Like an F-18.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
But what's cool about this is what's called a short takeoff, and we want to show this. So within hundreds of feet, we can get this jet airborne, but this is utilizing that lift system. And what I mean by that is when you look inside this aircraft, coming through the engine, that drive shaft is plugging into that lift fan. You'll see kind of that lid open. And that is where kind of the intake of air is going from that standpoint. Underneath that, you have the VAVBN, which is going to open up, which you see on the bottom.
What is that?
Variable angle vane box nozzle.
Okay.
That's kind of the exhaust section of that lift fan. So in that, though, that drive shaft is always spinning. But when we literally press a button right there, which we talk about interoperability of the aircraft, the C model, F-35C model, which the Marines fly as well, also has that exact button, but it's called a hook stoval button. So in the F-35B, it's for stoval, and the F-35C, that button is for dropping the hook. So there's a lot of redundancy in the system, so you can tell from a parts perspective, it's pretty awesome from a community standpoint. So when we push that button, you'll see the 3 BSN, or the 3 bearing swivel nozzle, doors open in the back, and then that physical engine casing, which everyone's seen, is going to rotate downward at that point. What's cool about the stoval system when we land, too, on a slow landing in this mode, is you can actually have the nozzle is going to go forward of 90 degrees. So it actually goes to 95, so you get what's called a little bit of power nozzle braking, not beta that you'll see in some other airplane, but it's like our mini version of beta at that point. So I've now pushed the button here. I'm talking with Chuckles. We're going to go over our safety checks for the routine itself. We're going to turn off ground collision avoidance system here just because it would be kind of based on some of the maneuvers we're going to execute. My landing taxi light's off. I'm squawking whatever ATC is having me squawk at that point, and then the box is mine from an air show perspective. So you're seeing that. Why we execute what's called a trundle stow, a trundle STO, short takeoff, is because some of the surfaces are not rated for the thrust that's coming out of that exhaust. So I think it's a 38,000 to 46,000 pound jet. You can imagine the amount of thrust that's coming out of there. So what we do is we let go of the brakes, which this is the most, I feel like a brand new puppy in training wanting to get going here. So this is the most I have to hold back, period, dot, because you let go of the brakes and you just let the jet idly accelerate to 60 ground. And then once it hits 60 ground, you go throttle in the corner. Once your engine spools up, we'll note that. And then we execute that short takeoff via a myriad of different reasons. We have an auto short takeoff mode on the boat, which is pretty neat. But at the field, we do typically a button or stick stow. Here, I'm going to do a button stow. So on the stick, the trim switch, I'm going to what's called Z-plunge that down at the stow initiation speed, which we calculate in that behemoth of a PCL that we looked at over there. And then at that speed, I'm going to go ahead and initiate, and you'll see the aircraft take off. But you'll notice that aircraft, when it takes off, it doesn't really rotate like a typical aircraft. It almost hops off the deck, and that's that lift fan, because you're not really using 100% of Bernoulli's principle here. You're using a lot of that lift fan to get off. So
brute force.
Yeah, we love this maneuver too, because this maneuver goes right into the min radius turn. So you're going to see me go from full stoval kind of transformer configuration, and in a couple minutes, I'm executing a 400 plus knot minimum radius full afterburner turn coming by the crowd.
Will you always go crowd right to left, or is it based on winds or the airfield?
It's based on the airfield layout, and that's one of the things we want to get first and foremost before we get to the location is the airfield layout, because we're going to go in the simulator and we're going to run this 5, 6, 7 times before we even go to the venue. So I want to know the exact layout, because we have a checklist. We use the checklist, obviously, starting the jet and stuff. We have a routine checklist. But really, when you're pulling 7 Gs and you're doing all these maneuvers, this stuff has to be hardwired into your brain. You don't have time to, let me see what number 2 is, cross the first one off. So this thing has to be so hardwired into your brain. So we practice this over and over and over, and we really don't accept anything but
perfection.
Perfection.
All right, so like you said, you do the liftoff here. And
button push here, and you'll see it kind of leap off. And then now I'm accelerating up to about 250 to 200 knots, gears coming up, and we're getting in this envelope. So if you can stop it there real quick. So you can't convert in the entire envelope of the aircraft. Typically, we like about 180 knots to 250 knots to convert, whether that's inbound or outbound.
Convert meaning go
from a normal aircraft to kind of that transformer.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. So you'll see that. I'm accelerating to about 200. Once I get to 200, that button is going to illuminate. It says ready, and I push the button. And then the jet is going to transform into normal myriad of flight.
Anybody can be an F-35 pilot.
Yeah, various different things that can happen when you push a button going in and out. Obviously, that drive shaft coming from the engine's unplugging essentially from that lift fan. Those roll posts are always pressurized, but the doors are going to close, and then that nozzle is going to come swing back up, and those doors are going to close at that point as well. And then it is buttoned up. So conversion outbound, you're looking at 15 seconds really to get that jet back to normal form.
Is roll posts the little exits on the wings that
exactly. If you look underneath it, you'll see kind of a mesh grating on that, but they're always pressurized and they're coming off bleed air essentially. But that's what gives us our kind of lateral stability arms wise as we rotate.
Okay, so as you've pre-briefed and rehearsed in the simulator, depending on which direction you take off, you might need to do a turn one way or the other to get set up for your first maneuver. What do we got going on here?
Yeah, so this is the min radius turn, similar to the F-35A and Raptor's min radius turn. So just showing how in full afterburner, how minimum turn radius we can put the jet under. What again is fascinating, as we talked about before, is we were just in a short takeoff mode essentially, and now we're right into this about a minute after. Yeah. So upwards of 7 Gs here. There's a slight incline when we execute this, just to keep kind of visuals on the crowd, and then a slight descent coming back the other way.
Yeah, Raz said the same thing. I would not have thought of that.
Yep. And then we're setting up for essentially the high alpha loop for the next maneuver. So I'm immediately going to snap wings level, 400 knots on the 1,500 foot chill line. And then, you can expect a high alpha loop showing the high alpha capabilities of that.
Okay. When you're doing that min radius turn, I mean, you're not just putting the stick back at full afterburner and just going, or I mean, are you modulating?
No, you're
pull?
definitely modulating.
Yeah,
I'll have Chuckles talk about the difficulty in the modulation of the airspeed as well for that min radius turn.
Yeah, so for that one specifically, we're going to initiate the maneuver around 400 knots. We initiate on the Cat 3 line about 500 feet from the crowd, but over the course of 360 degrees, we want to get about 1,000 feet further away from the crowd before we start aggressively maneuvering. So to do that, we'll accelerate from 400 to 425 on the outbound leg and then clamp back down to 400. We have some great instrumentation in the cockpit. So we have what's called an XL decel queue. It's sort of co-located with your flight path marker in the HMD. And if it's above the flight path marker, then you're going to be accelerating, and if it's below. So we'll just kind of tweak that to keep that carrot where we want it throughout the maneuver.
Believe it or not, I have something similar to that. My 30-year-old 757 that I fly when I'm trying to land in Minneapolis or wherever is just a little thing that just says, if you keep doing what you're doing now, you're going to go faster.
How is the min radius turn in the 7?
First class is not like that.
Okay, so,
No, I don't do a lot of those. But anyway. All right, let's see. What's coming up next?
Yeah, high alpha loop here. So we're going to go pure nose high. And if you pause it here, Jello, what you're going to see, which is interesting, is we go pure nose high, but we essentially set 80 degrees on the pitch ladder. You'll see a physical zenith in the HMD, and this is all off axis. So the F-35 helmet provides me all that. There is no HMD, HUD, heads-up display in an F-35. It's all a HMD, helmet-mounted display. Right. So I can go off axis. You'll have more symbology on axis. As soon as you go off axis, I still have all that green information that's providing to me. So I'll look up, but there's a zenith you'll see at the very, very top. The problem with that is it's a little bit non-gyro stabilized when you get up there, so it kind of tumbles. So we'll essentially set right before that zenith. So I'm parking it at 80 degrees nose high, but to the crowd, it's indistinguishable. So it's going to sit there essentially pure nose high. I'm in full afterburner at this point, accelerating upwards. We're looking for 3,000 feet, and this is where Chuckles and he's on the radio. We're going to give a call. So you're going to have back and forth calls. One of the calls we're going to make here is 3,000 and 150 to make sure that we hit the wickets of that airspeed. If any wicket is not hit, we'll get an immediate knock it off, and you'll see me kind of roll out and go drive away from the crowd at that point.
And that's just between the ground safety and you guys. So if I'm just barely paying attention, having my beer at an air show, it's like, oh, okay.
100%.
Now he's doing something else.
Yeah, 100%.
Hey, Chuckles, let me ask you this, though. This is Yuma. Yuma's pretty arid. And I'm not an F-35 expert, but it seems like a lot of times when I see it, you do see little wispies or whatever you want to call it coming off the wingtips. Is that a design thing or what's going on? And is that an issue for you guys at all? Is there any concern with the fact that it seems to me, the uneducated observer, that you guys seem to put out a lot of wingtip?
Yeah, so the F-35, similar to kind of a lot of the newer designed aircraft, uses control surfaces in kind of novel ways to ultimately give the pilot what he wants. So when you see those, it's usually either our leading edge flaps or trailing edge flaps kind of programming. And you tend to see those under the more high G maneuvers, but it's very common.
I just think it's pretty interesting, even in Yuma, where there's not that much moisture, presumably, in the air.
What you'll see with our sister squadron at 501, the East Coast F-35B demo, is they do a lot of their shows in the humidity of the South. So you're, Georgia, South Carolina, and it looks like a snake is shedding its skin as a reptile coming off there. So all the plane spotters, guys taking photos, they love those locations. So I would say Yuma was awesome, but it's a little they wish they had kind of once every year rain going on or something in Yuma for some more weather.
All right, so you get to your checkpoint here, and then what do you do?
Yeah, right now I'm executing a high alpha energy excursion pull. So on our stick, we call it S10, and it's essentially at the bottom of the stick. It's actually our nose wheel steering switch. So a lot of these switches do different things, or buttons do different things. So our nose wheel steering switch, or stick position 10, I'm going to go ahead and depress that, and I'm going to full pull back on the throttle, still in max afterburner. And you can expect the rapid AOA change. So what separates the F-35 too from a lot of modern day fighters is we're not a rate fighter, as you know, in a BFM engagement. We're more of a radius fighter. So our ability to pull alpha is pretty incredible. Alpha being an angle of attack. So similar to the Hornet. So what you're really seeing here is that nose really come around at a fast rate. So I'm executing that essentially alpha excursion, going past what we're limited to from an AOA, and then essentially rolling out on a 1,500-foot shit line.
Now, I'm guessing you're not doing anything to the engine, but if I had some sort of little gauge that told me what it was doing, is it helping you out? Is it going to move a little bit?
It is not from an F-35 perspective. We do not have thrust vectoring like the Raptor does. So F-35A, B, and C do not have thrust vectoring. So you're getting most of that alpha from those giant, I will say, horizontal stabs in there, as well as the leading edge flaps and the other control surfaces.
Okay, cool. Now you come out of that, and we'll just kind of skip ahead a little bit, but what maneuver do you set up for next? And I think it's...
Yeah, 234 setting up for the Mach run, coming by. In this case, left to right. We love this maneuver, 500 feet and 620 indicated is what we... But that's knots, right? So what you're looking at is real time about 700 to 730 miles an hour coming by the crowd. So in this case, we had a wall of fire incorporated with the Yuma air show, kind of giving a cool visual from the spectator point of view as we zoom by there. What you'll see after that is I'm going to go idle to dissipate some of that airspeed, and then I'm going to go into the pure vertical to go ahead and bleed down to set up for my next maneuver. We joked this is one of the hardest maneuvers to execute from the level 2 show. So if there is a ceiling above us, which prohibits or precludes us from doing the level 3 full high altitude demo, and we're kind of boxed into the low altitude, coming in at 620 knots indicated and not having the vertical to dissipate all that airspeed is pretty painful on the pilot. So who knew that the vertical and idle is the way to dissipate about 300 knots? But if it is the level 2 show, you can expect a series of extended hard G pulls to go ahead and bleed that airspeed off. And what people don't understand too, I mean, they probably do understand, but in the cockpit, there is just, my mask is sweaty, my body's sweaty, I'm grunting. It is a 15-minute high-intensity workout in there. We call it in the simulator hot mic, so you don't have hot mic on, but if you did, there would be a lot of internal monologue of me talking to myself and rooting myself on there. But yeah, the mask is sweaty, everything's sweaty, rolling down, all that kind of stuff. So the Mach run is the one that's really difficult to get airspeed off down low. But we do it, and we enjoy it because we're fighter pilots.
I don't want to steal your thunder, but I want to give a quick anecdote about a time I did this in a Legacy Hornet. I was in Fallon when they used to do air shows. I was flying off the wing of a friend of mine, Hal Schmidt, call sign Bull. And they set off the wall of fire just like this, about where you are. And the way I used to wear my helmet is where the visor came down, my mask was, there was a little piece of skin that was exposed. And I kid you not, I felt the heat on my cheek when I went by. I'll never forget it. It was the most amazing thing.
Oh, that's incredible.
And so I don't know if you guys have that or if you're covered up better than I was, but it was one of those things that just, pardon the pun, seared into my memory immediately because I thought, I don't understand thermodynamics real well, but it's like, how does that work? That's pretty cool.
That's too funny.
So,
yeah, you won't forget that.
No.
Yeah, interesting enough, we actually have 2 visors in the F-35. So we have the internal visor. Everything's projected onto there, which is including our night vision camera and our DAS. And then we have an outer visor that's made to break away in case of ejection, but that's essentially our sunglasses. So our black visor is on the outside. Okay. The clear visor is on the inside from that standpoint. So yeah, a lot of stuff to work for on those helmets.
I'm sure. Well, you were talking about the amount of exertion you have to do. Just be glad you're able to do that still, because when you get out of the business, then you turn into a squishy airline pilot.
And I will say, people always ask all the time. I get 2 questions. One I will not answer on the show. But the first question that we always get is, hey, is there air conditioning in there? And there is. There's an amazing environmental control system in this jet. So we can actually turn up and down the air conditioning. So one of my first things checklist in there is getting in and turning down the AC on the old Battle iPhone there.
Okay. All right, so we talked about if you have clouds you got to deal with, you have to do a bunch of pulling here. All right, so you come out of that, and, not to, denigrate your all's performance, but in some ways, when you're in regular airplane mode, it's a lot like other airplanes. I mean, you're doing high speed, slow speed, different things. So if you don't mind, let's just skip forward to maybe 410.
Yeah, 410, kind of an interesting maneuver here. We're going to do the square loop is what it's called. Okay. So from a square loop perspective, you're going to see a vertical pull into about 3,500 feet. It essentially creates a square here. So max afterburner, pure vertical, you'll see the acceleration there. And then S10, that's again a alpha excursion pull. We're going to full bunt forward here. If you pause that, this is one of the most uncomfortable spots as a demo pilot, because you are over the top. Once the canopy bow, essentially kind of the bow of the actual canopy, hits the horizon, your stick full forward. And this is what we call the strap check. If you didn't strap in correctly, or you had your peanut butter and jelly sandwich or something sitting on the side that you forgot to do.
Which none of these things should be
none of them happen. happened, this is jokingly, obviously, but yeah, if anything happened from that perspective, you're going to be kind of coming out of the straps as you're sitting there. So it's pretty uncomfortable. And it's a negative G pushover essentially in the vertical there. So you can imagine that's pretty uncomfortable on the body. So you hold that until we accelerate at 4,000 feet minimum and 200 knots. And then we're going to go ahead and execute another energy or alpha excursion at that point. And this is an interesting point where we're accelerating down towards the Earth full afterburner. And we essentially put the nadir now instead of the zenith straight up, the nadir straight down, accelerating until we hit our final checkpoint, which is essentially 3,000 feet or 300 knots. And you're going to see an aggressive square off of the aircraft. This is where when you get those high vapor days that you're going to see a pretty high and significant vapor pull off of the jet at this point. So you're pointing straight down at this point, and then we are squaring the jet off here.
You're doing a square loop, so you're kind of pausing and turning a round maneuver into a rectangular maneuver.
Yeah, just showing kind of the complexities of the kind of intricacies of the flight control system from that standpoint. Moving on to 525.
All right.
Jello, we got this slow speed pass. This is what I talked about from a kind of basic fighter maneuver flats perspective. The jet flies in that STOVL mode, can go all the way down to 0, right? 0, hover. But from this standpoint, we are in full conventional mode at this point. So we're using this as a high alpha fighter, and we're just sitting basically parked up in the aircraft. And what you're going to see is these horizontal stabs. They're essentially dancing. You'll see them dancing around, and that's the flight control system.
That's not you doing that.
That's not me doing that. From the jet, I'm utilizing pedal inputs at this point for coordinated lateral stick and pedals, and my stick is full aft. This is my right bicep got a little stronger at the end of the season here because the stick is essentially parked full aft and stationary, and then I'm using slight stick left and stick right, and then pedal motion stick left and pedal left, pedal right. What's difficult about this maneuver specifically is you can tell as I go in a straight line, you can't really see my helmet there. It's pretty difficult to see. I joke about kind of the movie Ace Ventura when he's got the head out the window after the window broke. So that, affectionately is the Ace Ventura kind of slow pass there. Unfortunately, can't put my head out the window. So what we really need to focus on here is as I roll out, that I focus that I'm 100% on the line at about 0.5 away because I don't want to deviate because I can't really make corrections in there. I don't really know where I'm going. This is a huge leverage on the safety observer. Check left, check right. And the other thing is you're settling. So you kind of use, in this case...
Settling like D.
Yeah, so how we catch that too is since your stick is the constant and it is full aft, you're now using, just like at the boat for, carrier aviators. I boat qualified on the C-45, the Macho Gossack. So you're using power at this point for vertical climb and descent at this point. So if you're a little bit high, stick is full aft in that bicep curl and you're pulling a little power back and a little power in, and I'm hawking my VSI, or my vertical speed indicator, just underneath my altitude box in my HMD at this point as we're flying down. Check left, check right. And then as I pass show center, I'm about 110 knots indicated here, which is incredibly slow. So where you would see this maneuver is what we would execute essentially is what's called a one circle fight. So if we were engaged in a dogfight, let's say we went head to head with an enemy fighter, let's say I then reverse to go nose to nose with that fighter, I have the ability to rapidly pull a high angle of attack, slow the aircraft down, and have immense controllability at slow airspeeds in this aircraft. And that's what that is demonstrating. And essentially get inside of his radius and employ weapons on that enemy aircraft.
Yeah. Chuckles, I'm surprised, frankly, that the nozzle doesn't help you guys out here a little bit, thrust vectoring like you were saying.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, if you were to try to do something like this in your Harrier back in the day, could you have manually given yourself some sort of thrust vectoring on like a slow speed pass kind of thing?
Yeah, so in the Harrier, I think Sack talked about it on the previous show. We had a nozzle lever right next to the throttle, and we had instantaneous control of our nozzles kind of at any point in flight. So bringing a little bit too much heat to a join, you could just add in some nozzles, slow the aircraft down. I think more so the Brits than US used what they called VIF, vectored thrust and forward flight, to energize those roll posts and maybe get a little bit of increased maneuverability. That's not something we train to as much, but very much a capability. You could add nozzles at any point in flight, energize those roll posts. The Harrier had a roll post in the nose and tail as well, so you could get a little bit more pitch control theoretically there as well.
Interesting.
And Jello, one thing, cool cut of note system-wise to point out here, you'll see those roll posts there, those roll post arms, and that's what we were referencing before.
Oh, yeah.
So there on the outside. You also see that kind of chrome silver right behind the radome there, and that's our EOT. So traditional fighter targeting pod, a lightning pod, for example, is going to be on the wings, but it's a huge radar cross-section RCS signature. So we utilize that. That is essentially our infrared targeting pod at that point. And then you see those big doors at the back where those would open up as well. So kind of a cool engineering view of the bottom of the aircraft as well in the F-35.
Do you end up doing, maybe it's coming up, a pass where you've got your your guts hanging out?
For sure, yeah. So one of our level 2 shows is going to be a weapon bay door pass, and then we do kind of a slow speed stoval pass. Some of those we use for the level 2 show just because we have less maneuvers that we can do in the vertical. So,
so I assume there are demos for the F-35A and C. Is the routine up to this point?
Yeah, so our level 3 demo is virtually identical to the Alpha and Charlie variant from a routine perspective. The difference that we incorporate is incorporating what we previously discussed in as kind of the mission of the Marine Corps, that expeditionary nature that fits into the MAGTF construct. So that's why we sequence with a short takeoff, trundle stow in this case, or a normal stow if the runway can execute it. And then we have our full hover sequence at the end, which we'll look at shortly, 360-degree flight, backward flight, and then vertical landings at the pads withstand. So yeah, other than that, the nuts and bolts. But when you go to a place that does not have Marine fighters, it's fascinating, I think, from an engineering perspective, to be able to see that hover is really what people want to see from that. The next one coming up, Jello, is 654. This is one of my favorite maneuvers. This is called the tack pitch, and you'll see Razzle execute this as well in his F-22 perspective. I refer to this as I always have these are Brembo's affectionate names for all these maneuvers. This is the dog sliding on the linoleum floor at that point, so I think Raz referred to it as a banana kind of vector at that point. But yeah, so the jet is essentially sliding, but we're able to rapidly change our lift vector 210 degrees in a matter of seconds, and we're using energy excursion pull and essentially reefing the Alpha on to kind of slide around at the turn. And then right after that, I'm kind of shimmying out the throttle to get the control surfaces neutral, and then we're going pure vertical, climb out at about 160, 180 knots there and just powering out of the maneuver. So tack pitch is always a crowd favorite. It's a fun one. It's super awesome with a lot of vapor and a lot of humidity as well in the day. And then now we're moving in to the bread and butter, the F-35 demonstration. Jello is about 9:30, I believe, which is going to be all our hover work.
I have to think all those controls you're demonstrating here and talking about make this despite the bad press otherwise, a fairly formidable BFM opponent. You did talk about BFM and your brother earlier. I wonder how that went.
I refer to that as what's called a lose-lose situation from the older brother instructor to the younger brother. So it's pretty awesome though. In Miramar, obviously you got still the devils and the snakes out there from a Hornet perspective. You got the Knights, the Tomcats, and then we're training squadron out there. So I got the opportunity working operations, the perks of working operations. So we coordinated. It was actually his first dissimilar, which one of his codes that he needs to get as a new combat wingman is fight against a different aircraft. So we coordinated it that I was his, as an air combat maneuvering instructor in the community, I was his instructor pilot to go out there. So I will say little brother, best friend, and kind of mentored him. He's about 3 or 4 years behind me. And I think the intricacies of sitting in the brief one-on-one, and it's my little brother sitting there, was just kind of, my brain kind of at first was, wanting to punch him or throw him against the wall. And I was like, we got to be professional. Okay, it's good. Yeah. But yeah, really professional brief, but just seeing him as kind of not a finished product yet, but where he's at. And then I think the neatest part of that whole experience was I launching an F-35, and a minute later, a Hornet, I would argue a pretty good joint on his part as well. Okay. Hornet pulls up next to me with a pilot with Jehemics on, staring at me, making all the comm calls. And it was fascinating to have him as a little brother. So even the admin and TAC admin, we call it, heading out to the area was awesome. And then we have 2 different frequencies that we use. We have 3 essential radios we use in the F-35, but 2 primary radios we use. We have kind of a cross switch on our throttle. Left is our primary comm alpha. We use that for air traffic control. Our comm bravo we use is typically our tactical frequency that we use interflight with each other. So that's a right actuation. So yeah, coming up and our conversations on TAC and just have my little brother sitting there was pretty awesome. So we went over, we flew over Chocolate Mountains in Eastern California, if anyone's familiar with those. Yep. And then, we did 4 sets of butterfly, high aspect. I won't say who won, but some shots were passed by either side. But it was just fascinating. My mom was asking, I think there were 4 or 5 text messages and calls, making sure we were both safe on deck after. So
that's what moms need to do.
Yeah, that's good.
Coming in the break, probably pretty cool.
Break was incredible. Yeah, I brought him in within regulations, but I would say in a good speed. And then, Dad. This is parents traveled to the air shows this year, which was pretty incredible for me. So both parents super supportive. But we joked for Yuma even. Chuckles was kind of the safety observer was similar location as my parents' location, and my dad was a Navy guy. He was a football coach, and he was all X's and O's. So he's like, yeah, that maneuver was good. So after I landed and came and gave my parents a hug, it was all X's and O's for my dad. Proud of me, obviously proud of me, but like, yeah, that looked great because I talked to my dad about the routine and everything that's going on. So very, very loving, but also X's and O's. And my mom was just in a ball of tears hugging me and all that stuff. So it was the same thing when my little brother and I landed.
Yeah.
It was like I think it was like a group phone call, and you could hear my mom crying in the background, and my dad asking who won and all that kind of stuff. So no, it's been really special. Yeah.
Good.
So
good. You didn't say earlier what your dad flew. Is that something?
He's a frog pilot. So
Okay.
he's a mighty CH-46 frog
Very
pilot.
good. Which was a Marine aircraft as well once. All right, so let's see, where are we going? We're maneuvering into transformer mode now here?
Yeah, if you go to 927, so what you're going to see is, and obviously as people know that videos, it's tough to do justice to the videos at this point, but what you're going to see is if you pause this now, so we were essentially just at 400, 500, 600 knots in some cases a minute or so ago.
Right.
So now I'm coming in, I'm dissipating all that airspeed because again, we talked about I need to be below about 250 knots to convert. That light comes on and then the jet's going to transform for me for about 10 to 15 seconds. Once that transform calls, I'm going to make a call to safety, and that call is going to be lightning 1, typically my call sign, gear down mode 4, gross weight, and then a safety check's complete that I've done everything that I need to. He'll give a safety call at that point, and then we will be moving forward into the routine. Funny little anecdote about our lightning 1 call sign. We ended up changing to nightmare 1, which is our FRS, later in the season, because there was one air show. This is like an aviation buff stream. There was one air show where there was F-35A demo, who was going to be Lightning 1, us who was Lightning 1, and then there was a P-38 that was also Lightning 1. So we had to do some call sign shifting there. It didn't cause any types of safety of flight things, but we realized it in the brief. We're like, hey, maybe we need to change. So that was like, all 3 Lightnings just there in one spot. It was pretty cool.
Good stuff.
But yeah, so coming into essentially the hover here, you're going to see that. And I'm going from 250 gears down, making the checks to Chuckles. And then I'm coming around. You're going to notice that I don't point directly at the crowd. Obviously, this camera angle may be different, but I don't point directly at the crowd. And the reason for that is if Brembo and all his magic pilot experience brings too much heat or schlitz into the hover, as it were, I need an avenue to essentially go off kind of 180 to the crowd. So you're going to see me kind of angle at the crowd. Once I know that I am in jetborne, which happens at roughly about 45 to 55 knots, I'm going to go ahead and now square up to the crowd and come into a complete hover at this point.
Jetborne being sort of like heliborne.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. We have some weird nomenclature. There's jetborne, there's semi-jetborne, and then there's our conventional. We typically call mode 4 and mode 1. Mode 4 being Stovall mode, if you were, and mode 1 being conventional mode. But yeah, semi-jetborne is kind of the jet is flying a little bit of Bernoulli, a little bit of transformer, and then when you get into full jetborne, you're a full transformer at that point. So what I mean by that is all the stuff associated with flying an aircraft goes out, and it is substantially or only flying via that lift system, roll post, 3BSN, lift fan, all that goodness associated with that. So you'll see it here. Lift fan is open. And what's interesting here you'll see is there's actually 2 positions for that lift fan. So it initially opens to the first position, and you can imagine as you get slower, that engine is just starved for air, right? So those little doors behind the lift fan, behind that roundel, are actually what's called an aux inlet door as well. And that opens up just to get more airflow to that engine. It's just as it's starved right there. So you're seeing that nozzle in the back is down, the lift fan is open, the aux inlet door, and those roll posts, you see those little doors we looked at right outside the gear?
Yep.
Those are open as well, and those are providing that lateral stability. Now, Sack talked about it a little. I'll use what's called translational rate command here. So I'm going to Z-plunge in the cursor control switch, which is essentially our mouse for all intents and purposes when we're doing anything else. And that's going to essentially, instead of giving a side vector and accelerating left, right, forward, and aft, it's essentially going to give me a stable platform up which to deviate. So I'm a stable aircraft. If I want to go right, and then I let go or ease off the control pressures and I come to a stable position. From this standpoint, I am monitoring intensely of the aircraft, but the aircraft is extremely stable, and Chuckles can talk to some of the differences associated with that, but very, very stable aircraft. And what I love to do in this position as I'm in the hover, we're initially going to come in at about 300 to 400 feet. You can imagine if it is a dirt field around it, if you kind of flow over the dirt field, you can cause a lot of FOD for other aircraft. So we come in high, about 300 feet, and it also allows for better visibility from a show perspective. I'll then stick forward, and again, the jet does not fly like a normal aircraft at this point. So if I go stick forward, the nose isn't going forward, as Zach discussed in his podcast. It is completely commanding a vertical rate up or down. So if I go stick forward, it stays perfectly level and starts lowering. As if I release the stick, it will then stabilize in that position, which is pretty incredible. And then we're able to essentially do an auto descent adds a feature which is called height rate trim. That nose wheel steering switch in this position, whereas it previously was for angle of attack excursion, on the ground was for nose wheel steering administering. Here, we can go ahead and push the stick full forward, which commands a 420 feet per minute rate of descent. We can press that button, and then we'll auto hold a 420 rate of descent. So essentially, I can let the stick release back to neutral. There's some complexities to that. If you push the stick again, it is additive, but I can essentially go to neutral, and now I can monitor making left and right adjustments as appropriate from that perspective. But from a demo perspective here, what I love to show about this is I come to a complete stop. We put it in the routine that I do a 360-degree turn. I think it's fascinating to see the 3BSN, that nozzle from the back, just sitting there. And then what I, as a kid, growing up, always remembered was the dead stop Harrier at the air show and the backwards flight, and just kind of looking at that and saying, what am I even looking at right now? So I like to give that what am I even looking at right now approach to this aircraft. So we'll typically fly backwards, probably 100 meters, essentially, just to show that aft translation. Realize this is all dependent on weather and pressure and all that goodness. So, for example, when Callie Callison and Champ Frazier were demo pilots a couple years back, I was a safety observer. We went to Kansas City. I think it was 110 degrees that day. Kansas City was, 1,000 plus foot of elevation. So the hover for us, we have to be a lot lower gross weight, and that adds in the complexity of I have a limited amount of time in this hover, as Zach talked about, coming to the boat. And this is where the demo, I think, is fascinating because it translates to our L-class carrier kind of boat landings. I have a limited amount of time to give the crowd a hover and all that kind of stuff before I need to RTB and get on before min-fuel, essentially. So all the negative aspects of a hot day, less dense air, higher elevation, less dense air, all those lead to a lower gross weight that I can physically hover. Again, in that giant PCL, we figure out that number physically for that day or using computer software. And then ultimately, we're not going to go into that hover unless we're there. So that is another check that as I'm sweating and, I'm ending the end of the play, as it were, and I make my call out on stem power, looking at my gross weight and fuel, and Chuckles goes, wait a second, that is, too heavy, or where are you at of fuel? You need to RTB. So he's my backup on that, which is extremely helpful. So much so that maybe I keep it coming. If we're within about 300 to 500 feet, maybe we can burn that off. If we fly a little slower, obviously it's more fuel burn, so you can kind of tweak the fuel at that point from that standpoint. But yeah, that is the challenge of giving them a show, but it is on a limited time basis. We can only hover for so long, and you're battling with yourself at the end there of like, hey, where am I at fuel, time and fuel? And we have bingo and joker fuels and all stuff, and we adhere to that. But there is this merging of like safety versus performance from a show performance perspective.
Chuckles, I'm guessing one of those limitations Brembo just mentioned isn't water. In the Harrier, right, if I understand correctly, you had water that was helping cool things, and you only had, 60 or 90 seconds worth, something like that. But is that an issue here?
Yeah, Jello, that's absolutely right. The Harrier had about 500 pounds of water that it flew with, and we had different datums that we could put the engine into with different RPM limits and engine limits. So in the Harrier, when you armed the water switch, the RPM limit and temperature limit for the motor were different, which provided more thrust, and then we did use water to cool the engine down as well. F-35 does not have water, has really one datum. And then I would say the one sort of key corollary that's somewhat similar is the F-35 will limit itself to 97% thrust when it's in STOVL. And then if you get yourself into a scenario where you need additional performance, you have the ability to execute HOTAS and a max performance pull in order to unlock that last 3% of thrust and remove the engine limits on the F-35 engine. So we do have a little bit of buffer if we need it with this aircraft.
And Jello, to the point previously with the flight control surfaces, you can see as you get the horizontal stabs back there are tilted downwards. This is what's referred to as lids, lift improvement devices when you get in the hover. So you see the inner weapon bay doors are open as well. Yep. That's for a lift improvement device as well. And Zach talked about that. We actually we have lights inside of our weapon bay, and we put those lights on when we're coming to the boat at night. So at the appropriate distance, he should see those lights pop up because your lids are working. Otherwise, you may be coming into the ship at way too fast. Your lids haven't by the distance. So he's judging that as well. So that's one of the features of the jet as well.
One more indicator.
Yeah, 100%. And you'll see the similarities with the Harrier are, we both hover, but the mechanics of hovering are completely different in this jet than the Harrier, and then our mission set's completely different. But we just show that from an air show perspective, LHD, L-class, all that kind of stuff is cool that we're able to use the capability of this stealth RCS of the new F-35, max afterburner capability, as well as the hover, like our predecessors came before us from Marine Air.
So trying to get my head around the idea of going backwards, because earlier we talked about your inceptors, stick and throttle, are forward, right, or down, up, left, right, faster, slower. Well, in my F-18, I never had anything to make me go backwards. So what do you do in a
You know what's
F-35B?
fascinating too is because when we're in Stovall, again, we talked about semi-jetborne versus jetborne. Again, when you're 250 all the way down to 55-ish knots, the jet is still flying like an airplane. So when I pull back on the stick, it's still going up, down, it's still flying like an airplane. Once you get into semi-jetborne, the HMD symbology actually changes. So we go from a flight path marker to a scaled climb dive marker. Some of the HMD symbology is different now. You have a ball that we're actually centering the ball into the wind. So when you go through that 55 to 45 knots and go into jetborne, physical visual cues change in the aircraft, and so do controls as well. So when you come down, the throttle, instead of being an idle stop and a mil max stop, is going to be a mid-range detent, which indicates kind of the reference speed, whether that's zero or what the ship is doing at that point. So to go backwards, we have on our water line in the HMD, we have what's called a translational rate vector, TRV, some fun
Everything's got an
pilot speak.
Yeah.
And it's a physical line, and it shows where you are going in the hover. So if you were to make a 3-part power correction, let's say we didn't have TRC engaged, and you went back, that little TRV, that little line would poke out and say, hey, I'm coming backwards. So we're going to reference that as well for fore aft. But if I wanted to go backwards, I'm in that detent spot, let's say it's 0 knots the airfield, I'm going to just pull back on the throttle, and the jet is literally just going to move backwards. The issue, though, is the performance needs to be there. There's another wicket in order to fly backwards based on winds. There's a significant drop-off if we don't have wind coming down the intake, albeit as small as it is, it still is pretty impactful from a performance standpoint. But yeah, that is very, very interesting, is flying by the crowd at 700 miles an hour and then flying backwards and looking at the crowd at negative 7 miles an hour, which is pretty fascinating. And I will say this, our jet is an incredible stealth asset. Man, it from a noise perspective, this puppy in the hover is a loud one. So I always love, that's our number one thing at the 10 is like, man, I didn't bring my ear pro. It was the loudest thing I've ever seen. So it's pretty cool to hear that.
Yeah. It's incredible. And to your earlier point, by the way, I remember when my stepdad showed up in our picture and took us to air shows. My first was Point Mugu in 1978.
Nice.
My mother loved the Harrier. She was just blown away. She had no idea. She just, loud airplanes and a fun day with my kids. But all of a sudden one stopped and looked at her and all of us. And so she still talks about that to this day. So.
And some interesting things people probably ask too. We typically don't do vertical takeoffs just because of the gross weight requirement. So we typically do the short takeoff. So here's backwards flight as well. If you see that, you see the exhaust going down. And then what's really neat about Yuma and Miramar and Cherry Point and Beaufort, all these locations that we execute these shows at, is we actually have a vertical landing pad. So again, we talked about the immense heat coming off a 38,000 pound jet in kind of one specific area. So we have to have rated pads. At Miramar, they're VLP 1, 2, 3, or 4. You'll see those out in the actual airfield diagram if you pull out an airfield diagram. Yuma, they're co-located on the runways themselves. Miramar has big kind of pads to utilize. So in these shows, so when you look next season when Chuckles is performing at both Yuma and San Diego, you're going to see a true vertical landing. When you go to your Capital Air Show, your Seattle Seafair, and your San Francisco, you're going to see those are going to be landing back at Oakland in a slow landing configuration. So a little bit different there, but when we talk about landings, please talk about kind of the 5 or 6 different landings that we can execute on any given time. I think is an interesting nugget as well.
Yeah, so I would say that's one of the biggest challenges, teaching students who, hey man, I've had to worry about one takeoff, one landing, and now we have a conventional takeoff, a short takeoff, a trundle stow, a button stow, a stick stow. Those are all our takeoffs. We have a conventional landing, slow landing, rolling vertical landing, creeping vertical landing. And each one has slightly different procedures, right? So that is definitely one of the biggest challenges of the F-35 is keeping your admin tight, because at the end of the day, when you're 600 feet off the ground and the carrier pattern is not when you want to have your procedures getting crisscrossed.
Chuckles, we both sound like Bubba Gump from Forrest Gump, talking about all the different shrimp that we have with all the landings that we can do. So,
but you don't just make it up when you get on the runway. Obviously.
True
right?
statement.
You're briefing it, you're looking at the performance,
sure.
You're planning it.
What's a cool capability, you talked to this too as well, is the ability to slow down. Like if it's bad weather and stuff, utilizing slow landings or vertical landings to our benefit from an instrument approach perspective.
Exactly to your point. Like in the brief, we're going to sort of analyze what are the conditions today. More often than not, VFR, it's going to be a conventional takeoff, conventional landing. But hey, the clouds are low, the runway's wet, or we're coming back with a bigger fuel state. We have that option to let's just slow everything down. Let's land at 100 knots and give ourselves more time, less descent rate, things like that.
Yeah. Well, what else is there to see on this
Yeah, you'll come around. If you push forward, you're going to see a vertical landing over on the other side. So we'll stabilize and hover at about 100 feet, get it cleared across at the boat, clearance clear to 100, clear to land at that point. And I'm stick full forward at this point. You do not want to cease a rate of descent below about 60 feet in this jet for hot gas ingestion that Zach talked about. Okay. I am making corrections all the way down. That's the other thing. The jet's very stable. I always give the anecdote, the F-35 has a lot of pilot relief modes, but if you don't know what you're doing, you can get yourself in a lot of trouble if you don't know what you're analyzing from a pilot relief mode standpoint. Yeah. From a student perspective, when we're teaching new students, this is something that once they get out of the simulators, maybe you do one VL, every week or every 2 weeks, or as instructors, maybe once a month. Maybe a manual once every couple months, right? So it's on you to really study and chair fly all these procedures because, again, like Chuckles said, the slow landing is typically 100 knots. We have a rolling vertical landing. The creeping vertical landing is at 25 knot ground, essentially VL. So if we need to vertically land for some type of emergency, so let's say, we have some sort of brake failure or issue with our hydraulics, we need to do a vertical landing, but we don't have a vertical landing pad. We may come in at a 25 knot creeping vertical landing and essentially just be able to stop the aircraft, shut the engine down so there's various different ways. We always joke too from a simulator perspective that the instructors they have their kind of flow, and there are some fun flow charts of things that can go or rabbit holes to go down. Oh yeah.
That's the time to do it.
The students too. When we were students, you get the gouge. You're sitting in the ready room and you're like, what did Mr. So-and-so do, or what did Major Norris do, and all this kind of stuff. And you work through all the myriad of different problems associated with that. So executing a vertical landing here.
And the nozzle I wanted to say is
it's dancing.
Right?
Yeah, you saw the horizontal stabs in that slow speed regime when we were in conventional takeoff and landing. That thing is dancing all around with zero pilot input.
Flight controls.
Zero pilot input. It's absolutely stable, absolutely incredible. Yeah. Now, when we touch down, that throttle back drives, I go right up, I push the button with a ready button, and then you can see, look at this, in 10, 15 seconds, that entire aircraft is now buttoned back up, and I'm taxiing forward. And now it looks almost indistinguishable to an F-35A or C. Yeah. We joke with that lift fan that we have a little extra traps, like we're weightlifting in this jet because it's got a little bit of bulge in the back. So it's very linebacker, very Marine Corps from that perspective. But yeah, indistinguishable in a lot of regimes.
You trade a little gas though for that.
We do, yeah. There's a gas trade-off, but from an expeditionary standpoint, your ability to land in a lot of different places is pretty incredible. So.
Chuckles, at any point in here, you as the observer last season could, I'm sure, call knock it off or, whatever terminology you use. But even in the airplane, I have to think at any given time, that if something happens and maybe you have different things, bird strike, I don't know, engine failure or something, but you kind of have an idea what to do in that moment, right? So how do you handle the different contingencies?
Yeah, absolutely. So overall, very safe routine. A couple key analysis points throughout the routine where Brembo's making the call outs, and if he hasn't met certain altitude or airspeed parameters, we'll either give him the board-to-board altitude or something along those lines. Once he's executed those maneuvers, there are several failure modes of the jet that will impose a limit of maybe 20 alpha, 4 Gs, or maybe only mil thrust, vice max afterburner. And the maneuvers are still recoverable once you've committed to them. That being said, good example, we were up in Seattle last season, and we got to knock it off from the air boss. A drone had flown up into the air box. So Brembo had to climb up into the delta pattern. We call knock it off on the radio. Brembo's thinking, hey, maybe was it something I did? What's going on? We're trying to get the communication from air boss, who, oh, by the way, is on a boat out in the middle of Genesee Lake. So we're not co-located with anyone who are the key players in this. But we get Brembo up to the delta. Law enforcement, using their techniques and procedures, are able to bring that drone down and collect that. And then Brembo's able to get his head back in and execute the rest of the show.
Yeah, to that point, phenomenal job by Seattle Seafarer in executing that. It was executed flawlessly, like it was in the brief, but kind of shows the complexity from a demo perspective of again, fangs out, and then it's a knock it off, and now I have to put on my FAA General Aviation hat and really focus on what we're doing at that point. Obviously went back after it was cleared, all that stuff was good, but and he makes a good point. Yuma's a great one to start because it's very clean cut. You're at the airfield. When you go, like last year, for example, again, they were the most surreal experiences I've been in from a beauty perspective, but Lake Washington and Seattle. And obviously, the Bay Area in San Francisco was gorgeous. But when you go over there, so the aerobatic box in the middle of the water, and surrounding the box is, legally a myriad of different boats that are outside of the box, right? But the complexity of the F-35 or F-22, F-16, F-35A don't have to worry about it because they're just, in airplane mode doing their airplane stuff. For us, when we come in and hover, we hover in that aerobatic box, okay? And we try to move forward to show the crowd, all that kind of stuff. But you can imagine if we are off altitude coming into that box, 38,000 pounds of thrust coming in a boat, some guy sitting there, in his bathing suit looking up as we come in. So if you're off parameters or anything for that nature, it can be extremely dangerous. So that's where safety comes in as well of, hey, when I'm slowing down in the hover, let's keep enough altitude. Let's make sure that we are deconflicted from all the boats. Coming down, making sure positioning is right. So, for example, in San Francisco, he was up on a 17-story high-rise, given all those safety examples. So, again, everything within the realm of safety, but it just shows you the difficulty level that kind of the F-35B brings from that, from things that other people don't really think of from a fighter demo perspective, which was pretty interesting.
When Raz was in here, he talked about the need, for example, if he was at Yuma, I think we used Miramar and North Island as the examples, but just to stick with Yuma, that he would need to know that, say, El Centro was available with good weather and arresting gear. Do you have a divert type requirement similar to that? I mean, with your ability to land vertically, I would think maybe not, but...
One of the unique advantages of the F-35B is its STOVL, right? So there's no hook on the B variant because things like brake fail, nose wheel steering fail, hey, let's just decelerate to 0 knots and bring the aircraft down. So we do have divert requirements in terms of weather, things like that, but usually we have the ability to slow the aircraft down and land in just a few thousand, if not 100 feet if we need to.
What's cool is you can bring, we always love this on instrument checks, but there's a trade-off, right? So every time we go into STOVL, you're going from a fuel burn of about 100 pounds per minute to 400 pounds per minute in a VL or 200 pounds per minute in a slow landing type environment, 100 knots. But what is neat is if you are behind the jet or if it's bad weather or the runway is wet or all that kind of stuff, hey guys, today we're going to come in, we're going to do 100-knot slow landings. And you can imagine, obviously in civilian aviation, how much nicer you would imagine, the ILS needles at 100 knots, vice 150, 160 knots coming in there. So much so that, hey, we can decelerate all the way down to doing vertical landings. So you can really slow down the picture if you need to, if you're an extremis in an emergency. Just understanding that as soon as you are in that mode, that you're now sacrificing some of that time for mental processing of the approach itself for the actual fuel requirement that you have at that point. There's a lot of tools in our tool belt. We use that Swiss Army knife analogy from the F-35B and why it fits so well in the Marine Corps. But there are a lot of tools at the expense that students can use or fleet aviators can use to go ahead and, from an emergency perspective, fix a problem at that point.
Yeah. You just have to learn how to use all those
tools.
tools.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, cool. Hey, I want to transition to a stage here where we can let our Patreon supporters ask questions. I told them I was going to be sitting down with you two fellas, and I got a handful of questions. One is from Stephen Coate, who says, what capabilities of the F-35 is unique to demonstrate compared to older generation fighters? So, I mean, right, it's kind of hard to demonstrate the stealth feature, I suppose, but I don't know, maybe some of these we've answered, but what do you think of Stephen's question? What capabilities of the F-35 is unique to demonstrate compared to older generations?
Yeah, one of the things that goes missed at the air show that you see, people look at the jet and they're like, oh man, that's got some weird angles on it. That's interesting. That must be, cool new design. Tesla came out with a new truck and it's got different, but what they don't really understand is the fascination associated with the jet that can hover to land on a postage stamp ship in the middle of the ocean that is fully stealth, the most advanced fighter jet in the world. We can execute 4 and 8 ship operations as F-35s, communicating back and forth between aircraft as battle space commanders, essentially, and have such an impact on the battle space with our aircraft. So from that standpoint, it's hard because even as you mentioned, it's like, yeah, you do kind of the same maneuvers, some of the F-16, all that kind of stuff. But the fact that we are able to use all of our sensor capabilities, our stealth capabilities, and also have a very similar routine to an F-16, an F-18, all this kind of stuff is pretty fascinating. I'm proud of that, to fly this aircraft, of what it can provide for the Marine Corps and our mission that is not necessarily immediately apparent just in air shows themselves. So I think that would be the takeaway.
Good stuff. Derek Burney says, what is your favorite maneuver to fly? Chuckles, have you actually flown this demo? Or you earlier you said you have a couple people, but I thought you said you were the ground observer. But have you done the demo, or maybe not in front of people? Or
yeah, so I've flown the demo, fully qualified. We executed that back in November. I have not flown in front of a live crowd, though. So I've had an audience of about 25 people.
So to Derek's question, what is your favorite maneuver to fly so far?
I am a huge fan of the tack pitch.
Okay.
So that is a maneuver that just demonstrates the incredible nose authority of the F-35. We execute a very high performance turn level across the horizon and then rapidly reorient our nose into the vertical, climb up to about 3,000 feet, and then overbank back into the next maneuver. But it is fun, dynamic. You get a lot of those sort of G vapors coming off the wingtips, and that's a really fun one.
How about you, Brembo?
It was fun, just anecdotally for Chuckles, because I did a sim workup from a simulator perspective, and the simulator you're really focused on. It's almost an instrument scan because you have no feel. We call them full motion simulators, but you can't put a simulator on a gyroscope that pulls 7 to 9 Gs. So our simulators are incredible. They're bubble canopy. It's an actual mock cockpit. You can link them up 4-8 different F-35. It's an incredible capability, but you don't really get the G of the feel for it. Doing the maneuvers, my first time out in El Centro, his first maneuver, the min radius turn, you take off from Miramar, you do all your checks, all that kind of stuff, and your first maneuver is 400 knots and 6 to 7 Gs in that turn, and it was anecdotally hearing his response of like, oh, okay, a little more G on the jet for this one was pretty awesome as his first flight. So the min radius turn, and he crushed it. His workup was incredible, and again, it goes with him, safety observer all year, watching the routine as the safety guy, and now getting in to do it. I can't think of a better candidate for this season who's gonna show for Marine Corps F-35B. I would say my favorite maneuver is probably tack pitch is fantastic. The nose high pedal turn is a fascinating maneuver. So we essentially go pure vertical nose high at about 4,500 feet. We're going to go full F left stick, full left pedal, similar to how Raz does, and you're going to rapidly reorient the nose, essentially 720 degrees before coming out. So you'll essentially see it's kind of referred to affectionately as a falling leaf maneuver, but you're essentially getting within probably 20 to 25 seconds, 720 degrees of nose position change in front of the crowd. So, and then the hover, obviously, you're sitting there in a hover in front of the crowd, and just it's pretty fascinating. The first time we hovered too, or certainly me in this jet, I think one of the first flights you're going out there, you're breaking a sound barrier as a brand new student. You're going out and you're fighting to a limited capacity, and then you're coming in and doing a hover, and that all happens within like a month. So you're going home and sitting on the couch after a couple of these flights, just thinking, wow, okay, what's tomorrow going to bring? So this community comes fast and furious from that standpoint.
Joe Kunzler wants to know, can we expect flares over Seattle Seafair? We haven't talked about flares today. It's a big part of the Raptor demo. Is that a part of the show, or has anyone ever? Yeah,
we've certainly MG61s would be the training flares we use. That's what Raptor and F-35A use. We've looked into it, paperwork process that we need to go through and all that kind of stuff. But I think it would be completely feasible, and I would love to incorporate that in the show. I think it adds a certain flair, if you will, unintended.
But I think to Joe's question, if I remember what Raz said, he would only do it at military shows. Certainly stipulations. We talked about the complexities of the water shows that are different. So this would be more of a Yuma Miramar type thing. And again, we're not approved for it now. So hopefully, maybe in the future. Okay. My last question is from Mike Bridges, who says, is there any time limit for the hover maneuvers you do during a show?
Yeah, a lot of factors. I would say the biggest limiting factor is how much fuel we have. So burning close to 500 pounds a minute while we're established in the hover. So that's kind of our biggest limitation. That is a challenging operating environment for the F-135 engine, Pratt & Whitney. And there are some time limits associated with the engines. Those are all kind of dependent on the environmental conditions. So on a hotter day, at potentially a higher pressure altitude, those limits will change as well.
Good. Guys, this has been a lot of fun. I'm sure we could keep going. I don't know. What have I not yet asked about the F-35B or maybe the demo?
This season, we're really excited for it. Again, ultimate mission for us is creating new Marine dogfighters for the fleet, but the ability to go out and share this jet and share the hard work that goes in from a Marine Corps perspective. Again, we get to go out and fly the demonstration, but really you don't see the countless hours of hard work from the fleet operating forces who are out there forward deployed right now. The Marines at home who don't get to go to the air show tent and shake hands and do interviews, right? So that's essentially why we love doing this. We hope we have the capability of doing this season, but this season should be an awesome experience. We're excited to get back out there. Chuckles is gonna crush it. Not to put pressure on it, but if you want to probably discuss this season's schedule as well, it'd be fantastic.
Yeah, just kind of one quick thing first. So it's the Marine Corps' 250th birthday this year. So that's kind of exciting. Marine Corps Community Relations is obviously excited about that. Marines are excited about that. So additional opportunities to kind of share the Marine Corps brand with the public. So we're doing Marine Weeks, kind of separate from the air show stuff, but Marine Week is going to be going in Austin, Atlanta, Boston, Chicago, Nashville, and Los Angeles. And then ultimately it's going to culminate with a Marine Corps Ball celebration in Washington, D.C. So that's big stuff. In terms of the air show itself, we're starting off in Yuma like we talked about, March 15th. March 22nd, we're going to be heading up to the California Capitol Air Show in Sacramento. Very excited about that one. The East Coast demonstration team, May 24th, is going to be doing the Bethpage Air Show in Jones Beach Park in Long Island. June 28th, they're doing the National Cherry Festival in Traverse City, Michigan. And then Oshkosh in the middle of July. Pivoting back to the West Coast, first weekend in August, we're going to be heading back up to Seattle for the Boeing Sea Fair. Obviously, have our hometown air show, Miramar, here end of September. Yep. And then Columbus Day weekend, we're going to essentially my hometown of San Francisco for SF Fleet Week. So very excited about what we have on the table this season.
Yeah, I would think so. It sounds like a great routine. Probably not too exhausting, though, right? I mean, some guys talk about going from show to show to show. Sounds like this is spread out a little bit.
Yeah, what's interesting is, it's a different level of exhaustion. From a standpoint for Chuckles and I on a given week from a fleet replacement squadron instructor, I absolutely adore it because, and I think it's, as again, Chuckles talked about, it's a perfect place for the demo because we are, I would say, subject matter experts on systems where that kind of, tactics kind of takes first and foremost in the fleet. So system subject matter experts, we're giving lectures all week, but we're also tactics experts as well, or experts, capable within that, right, as professional aviators. So we're working a full week, and then Thursday essentially is when typically for maybe a Saturday, Sunday show, or maybe Wednesday for a Friday, Saturday, Sunday show, we're hitting the road at that point. But you can expect typically us, instead of hitting, maybe 2 shows that week, we're hitting 1 show, but we have a pretty robust instructor schedule on the beginning half of that. So I would say from a longevity standpoint, or just towards the end of the season, it does get, but it's awesome. We love it. You get fired up every show you get to. And what you get to interact with and show the public is incredible. So, yeah.
Air shows are always a great time.
Yeah, and as a secondary billet, right, for us, you're essentially the detachment OIC for all of these air shows. Okay. So there's a lot of stuff that goes in behind the scenes, coordinating with kind of the airlift that's going to get our Marines and tools up there, coordinating with the air shows. You attend some air show events, went to ICAS last December, liaised with everyone. So there is a lot of work involved. It's less air shows, but maybe not quite as much of the support that some of the established teams get.
Yeah. And is there a way for people who are excited about it to follow the team or you or something on social media?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a Instagram account. I try to keep our schedule up to date there. I'm happy to have that posted here. We do not have a team demo account, so kind of just got the torch from Brembo once we did the season changeover.
Cool. Guys, again, this has been great. I guess we know about the future of the team, it sounds like. How about the future for you all? You're obviously the guy next year, right? So you'll be doing this for a little while longer, and then what after that? Or is it too soon to tell?
Yeah, I would say generally too soon to tell. Going to be primary pilot this season and probably a backup the season after. Have a little under 2 years left here in San Diego. And then overall, kind of generally speaking, normal Marine Corps expecting to rotate back to the fleet after this tour.
All right. Brembo, how about you?
Yeah, excited to go back as an instructor. I think talked to Chuckles heading out as a safety observer afterwards. Trying to do the Tom Brady Fox Sports approach and do the hopefully my salary is as high that I can be the ground safety observer after the fact. But yeah, I'm excited to go back to the instructor job and then kind of more to follow, see what the Marine Corps has in store for me. So
good stuff. Well, we always enjoy ending on call signs, and you said earlier you're both Craig Michael, but Craig Norris, Brembo. I don't know.
Yes, sir.
What can you learn about that?
So as a new guy, Brembo is the company that makes our brakes, affectionately named. I had on one of my first sorties in the aircraft, I had a hot brake situation. It was very close to the call sign review board as well. And I was, really happy with it. As you can see, I got the decal back there. So as you know, Navy and Marine Corps call signs are very, we have a lot of good egos around. So they're always positive and at a good light. So yeah, I really enjoyed it and really embraced it though. So.
All right. And Craig Turner, Chuckles?
Yeah, so if you tell a really good joke, you may find out organically how I got my call sign. But showed up to the fleet and was pretty quickly selected to deploy right when I showed up to the Harrier fleet. Needed a call sign, and just peeling back the onion, I have a pretty unique laugh. So hanging out on the ship, that laugh came out numerous nights in the wardroom and kind of stuck.
All right. Well, I'll consider myself then a do-over here on the show because I don't know if I was funny enough to get it out of you, but we'll see if we can get it off tape afterwards.
Sounds great.
So, cool. Guys, before you go, got a couple Fighter Pilot Podcast guest patches. Awesome. That these aren't, I know you're government employees, so these aren't extremely valuable necessarily other than the intrinsic value. They're not big financial amounts either, but Chuckles, You got to wear that during a demo.
Yeah.
this season.
Yeah.
Can you pull that off?
We'll try to get that one supersonic for you.
Even if it's just in your pocket.
Great. Hey, Jill, I really appreciate that. Would love to give you a shoulder
Thank
patch
you.
as well.
Well, it wasn't
patch as well,
expected. This is cool. So the panel, by the way, over your right shoulder is Marine Corps only. All these sound panels all have different patches, but I have a deep love for you guys, so I wear red when we're going to sit down together.
I love it.
So I'll have to find room on that. And happy 250th in advance. That's the other thing. I'm thinking about taking the whole month of November and trying to do Marine shows.
That'd be great.
Yeah, we'll
that'd
see
be
if we can pull that
fantastic.
off.
That's awesome.
But no, this is really good. Guys, any parting shots? I always like to let my guests have the last words if you got any.
Yeah, first off, just want to say thank you. This opportunity to come here is one of the many things on the list of unique opportunities we've had being part of the demo program. Just want to say thank you to you for that. And then thank you to the team as well. And the team is like bigger than Brembo and I. It's bigger than the Marines. You have air show personnel who have been doing years sometimes worth of work to get these air shows going smoothly. Just like we talked about, it's some of the Marine lift who gets our Marines and tools out there, C-130s, Ospreys. And then the support we get from higher and adjacent units. Thank you to Brembo for getting me through the syllabus I needed to be the primary demo pilot for next season. And then for your listeners, really hope you can come out to see one of our shows, talk through some of those dates, either to an air show or Marine Week event would be great. So.
Yeah, for sure.
And Third Mall has been phenomenal from a sports standpoint, Mag 11 as well. And then our commanding officers who's been during the team, Lieutenant Colonel Zombie Wellington and Lieutenant Colonel Drip Davis have been awesome from a sports standpoint. So it all starts with them, and then it starts with all the fantastic enlisted support as well that we've had. So really appreciate it, Joe.
You're welcome. Hey, thanks for watching this episode of the Fighter Pilot Podcast. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something new. I still do every episode. Now, as a quick reminder, we try to explain all the jargon, but in case you missed something, head on over to fighterpilotpodcast.com where we have a glossary of all the different terms we use. And while you're there, check out some of the cool merchandise that we offer. For additional content and to help support the show, please go check out our Patreon page. We'll see you next week.